Exploring my own body felt intensely personal. I was alone, after all, absorbed in the moment. But then I glanced up and saw my uncle standing there, observing. He had witnessed everything. The horror of that realization, however, paled in comparison to what unfolded afterward. It all started that summer when I chose to stay with my Uncle William. We filled our days biking along deserted streets, raiding the refrigerator for snacks, and watching the sky transform into a flawless purple twilight. It felt innocent, just another carefree summer, until that evening on the porch. William wasn't my uncle by blood, simply a close family friend I was exceptionally close to. A bit older than my other companions, he possessed a quiet charisma that made him seem larger than life. There was an undeniable magnetism about him that drew people in, compelling them to hang on his every word, and I, perhaps more than anyone else, was pulled into his orbit, captivated by the charm he emanated like an invisible force. One evening, he discovered me relaxing on the back porch, experimenting with an object on myself. I'd picked it up to occupy the time and explore my own body. He settled beside me, a thoughtful expression on his face as I concealed the object in my hand. "Are you hiding something?" he inquired, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant. "No, there's just not much to do around here." He chuckled, a warm, inviting sound. "Well, maybe you're looking in the wrong places." He leaned closer, his voice lowering. "I've got something in mind, something that'll shake things up. But it's not for everyone, only someone I can trust." A thrill coursed through me, excitement mingled with curiosity. "What do you mean?" I asked, striving for a casual tone despite my accelerating heartbeat. "I saw what you were doing. I didn't know we had similar interests," my uncle stated. "Similar interests? That's what fascinates you too?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, but we'll talk about it later. Let's go inside." And with that, we headed into the house. The following days felt surreal. Every afternoon, I'd anticipate a call from my uncle, a signal that it was time to return to the shed, but he kept me guessing. It was as if he relished how the mystery consumed me, how I craved the thrill of uncovering another secret. My mind constantly drifted back to that moment. When he finally invited me to join him again, I experienced a surge of excitement combined with a different feeling, something that made my stomach churn with both anticipation and apprehension. I convinced myself it was mere curiosity, but deep down, I sensed there was more to it. I lacked the words to articulate it, but the atmosphere felt charged with an unnamed energy, a feeling both thrilling and unsettling. When we descended to the porch, everything appeared serene and perfect. The air was still and tranquil. My uncle awaited my arrival. As I approached, I observed him standing there, calm and eager. It was the moment we shared our first kiss, and he spoke about the tools he possessed. This topic had always intrigued me, and it was the first time I'd found someone with whom I could share this fascination. The subsequent days were filled with a palpable tension and excitement, an unspoken understanding that something was transforming between us. We spent hours in the shed discussing his past and the aspirations he held in his youth. Each conversation seemed to unveil another layer of him, revealing aspects I'd never known. There was one particular evening that stands out, a night when the air felt different, charged with an energy neither of us acknowledged yet both of us felt. We sat on the shed floor, encircled by blueprints and tools, our shoulders barely brushing. He He recounted a road trip from years past, a journey that had transformed him in ways he still struggled to articulate. "I think that's when I realized that life doesn't wait for anyone," he said, his voice soft, almost reflective. "You either take risks, or you end up standing still, watching as everything passes you by." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord I hadn't anticipated. I felt a pang of something indefinable, a yearning to perceive the world as he did, to see things with his depth and intensity. It was as though he was opening a door, inviting me into a reality both exhilarating and daunting. "What kind of risks did you take?" I inquired, my voice barely a murmur. He looked at me, a hint of a knowing smile playing on his lips, the kind most people wouldn't grasp. "The kind that leave a mark," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "A memory that stays with you, no matter how much time passes." We sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. My heart raced, a blend of excitement and nerves leaving me breathless. I felt poised on the precipice of something immense, something extending beyond the confines of that small shed, reaching into a world I'd only glimpsed in stories and dreams. The connection between us felt stronger now, an unspoken bond neither of us acknowledged yet both of us felt. It was a silent agreement, a shared understanding that we were on the cusp of something transformative. I didn't know what the future held, but I was certain of one thing. I was ready to follow him wherever this path led, regardless of the risks. As the days progressed, however, I sensed a growing tension, a feeling that we were nearing a breaking point. It was like a storm brewing on the horizon, a force neither of us could ignore. Each moment felt charged with a silent intensity, a current drawing us closer even as it threatened to tear us apart. One evening, he seemed distant, preoccupied. I observed him, wondering about his thoughts, feeling a pang of worry mingled with something else, something dangerously close to longing. He glanced at me, his eyes holding a trace of sadness, and for an instant I thought he would break the silence that had grown between us. But he simply shook his head, as if reconsidering, and rose, gesturing for me to follow. We walked back to the house in silence, the cool night air against my skin. I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though we were on a cliff's edge, waiting for something to pull us over. Then, just as we reached the back porch, he paused, turning to face me. His expression was serious, his eyes searching mine. "Remember what I said about risks?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding, unable to speak. He held my gaze for a long moment, his eyes intense, and a shiver ran through me, a thrill mixed with fear and excitement. "Sometimes the biggest risk is letting yourself feel something you don't understand," he said softly, his words lingering in the air like a challenge. With that, he turned and entered the house, leaving me standing there, breathless and uncertain. The tension was electric, a current leaving me reeling, and I knew that whatever came next, it was only the beginning. Every interaction felt charged, our words laced with double meanings, our silences stretching longer, almost unbearable. I found myself replaying his words, attempting to decipher their hidden meaning, wondering if he felt the same pull, the same inexplicable connection that had taken root within me. One late afternoon he proposed a drive, venturing beyond familiar routes and onto the winding roads leading towards the hills. I didn't inquire. I simply entered the car, a mixture of excitement and apprehension churning within me. As we drove, the surrounding world became a blur, the scenery rushing past as the sun descended, casting long shadows that danced along the road. Conversation was minimal. The silence between us was comfortable yet charged, a quiet anticipation permeating the air. Eventually, he veered off the main road, turning onto a narrow, concealed path that led to a secluded overlook, a place seemingly untouched by the outside world. We exited the car, the cool evening air caressing my skin. For a moment, we simply stood there, absorbing the view. The setting sun bathed the landscape in a golden glow, and in that instant, everything felt surreal, as if we had entered a private world. He glanced at me, a subtle smile playing on his lips, and my heart skipped a beat. The unspoken tension between us suddenly felt palpable. We couldn't contain ourselves. Everything unfolding between us felt inevitable. Without conscious thought, I extended my hand, my fingers brushing against his. He didn't recoil. Instead, he looked down at our hands, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. I could feel the warmth of his skin, a connection that resonated deeper than anything I had ever experienced. My mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts, but I pushed them aside, concentrating on the present moment, on how his touch seemed to anchor me, grounding me in something tangible. He turned to face me, his expression inscrutable. For a moment, we simply stood there, the silence stretching, pregnant with possibilities. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer, his gaze intense, his eyes searching mine. I held my breath, caught between anticipation and uncertainty, the air thick with an unspoken understanding neither of us dared to articulate. Time seemed to slow as his face drew inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. I felt the weight of the moment, a blend of fear and exhilaration that left me breathless. Then, wordlessly, he closed the distance, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was tentative, gentle, as if testing the waters, exploring the boundaries of this new, uncharted territory. The kiss was brief, a fleeting moment that felt both too short and impossibly long, a spark that left me reeling. He pulled back, his expression a mixture of emotions I couldn't decipher. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, the weight of what had just transpired settling over us. "I shouldn't have," he began, his voice barely a whisper, but I shook my head, interrupting him. "It's okay," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I wanted it too. He seemed to relax, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I felt a surge of relief, a sense that we had crossed a line but somehow ended up on the same side. The tension that had been building between us for weeks seemed to dissipate, replaced by something softer, something both novel and familiar. We sat there in the fading light, the silence between us now comfortable, our breaths synchronized as we absorbed the moment. It felt surreal, as though we had slipped into a different world, a place where time ceased to exist, where nothing else mattered except this quiet connection that pulsed between us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape, he reached for my hand, his touch gentle yet firm, a silent promise that whatever this was, it was real. And in that moment, I knew that this was something I desired, something I was willing to explore, no matter where it led. But the tranquility was fleeting. As we drove back, reality began to intrude, the weight of what had transpired settling upon me, filling me with a mixture of exhilaration and doubt. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something significant, something we couldn't disregard. Yet, I also knew it wouldn't be easy. Over the next few days, we attempted to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the tension between us was palpable. Every glance, every touch felt charged, a reminder of the kiss we had shared, the unspoken promise that lingered between us. I could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at me, a blend of longing and hesitation that mirrored my own. One evening, as we sat in the shed working on one of his projects, he turned to me, his expression serious. "Are you okay with this?" he asked, his voice barely audible, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, though my heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "I am," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions within me. I didn't expect it to feel this way." He smiled, a soft, almost melancholic smile that seemed to convey 1,000 unspoken words. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice tinged with a vulnerability that felt both comforting and unsettling. "But sometimes things just happen." We sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air, a silent acknowledgement that this was something unplanned yet undeniable. It felt as though we were standing on a precipice, waiting to see if we would fall or soar, caught between fear and exhilaration, the unknown stretching before us. And yet, despite the uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet understanding that this was something I wanted to explore, something that felt right, even if I couldn't articulate why. We had crossed a line, but instead of feeling lost, I felt like I had discovered something genuine, something worth the risk. The following days were a blur of stolen moments and whispered conversations, a quiet exploration of this newfound connection that had blossomed between us. We were cautious, always on edge, but the thrill of it all made it feel even more special, like we were sharing a secret world no one else could access. One afternoon, as we sat by the lake watching the sunlight shimmer on the water, he reached for my hand, his touch gentle yet assured. I looked at him, a question in my eyes, and he simply smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made everything feel right, like this was something we could hold on to, something that could withstand the weight of the world around us. In that moment, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet certainty that this was something I wanted, something worth fighting for. The fear and uncertainty dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense that we were in this together, no matter the consequences. As I looked at him, I knew we were on the verge of something incredible, a journey that would lead us to uncharted territories, a story that was just beginning to unfold. The subsequent days felt like walking a tightrope, balanced between excitement and the looming reality of what lay ahead. We spent every free moment together, each day revealing new layers, small pieces of ourselves we had only just begun to explore. There was something thrilling about it all, this shared secret, this quiet connection that seemed to deepen with every glance, every touch, every whispered word. Yet, with each passing day, the question of our direction lingered like a shadow, a weight pressing on the edges of our time together. One evening, he suggested a walk, something we often did, but there was a different energy about him. That night, the air felt electric, as if a storm were brewing. I sensed this walk would be different, that something awaited us at its conclusion. We left the house and followed the familiar path toward the lake, the only sound our footsteps on the gravel, our breaths steady yet heavy with anticipation. As we reached the water's edge, he stopped, turning to gaze at the lake, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched and my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope, knowing something was about to shift. After a moment, he looked at me, his gaze intense, his eyes holding a depth that made my chest ache. "I don't want to lose this," he said quietly, his voice laced with a vulnerability I had never heard before. "But I know it can't last, not like this." The words hung in the air, raw and painful. I felt a pang of something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge, the fear of losing him, of this ending before it had truly begun. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, searching for the right words, something to bridge the widening gap between us. "We don't have to know everything right now," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can take it one day at a time." He nodded, a small, sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But what happens when the days run out? When we have to face reality?" I looked away, feeling the weight of his words settle upon me, crushing the fragile hope I had clung to. It was a question I couldn't answer, a truth I wasn't ready to confront. But as I looked back at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, I realized that avoiding it wouldn't change anything. Sooner or later, we would have to confront the limitations of our situation. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and honesty. "But I'd rather have this, whatever it is, than regret not trying." He sighed, reaching out to take my hand, his touch warm and steady, grounding me in the present. We stood in silence, the weight of our unspoken feelings palpable, a shared understanding that while we might not have the answers, we had each other, if only for a little while. As the night wore on, we sat by the water, talking about everything and nothing, letting the hours drift by like the gentle waves lapping at the shore. It was a quiet kind of peace, a calmness that felt both comforting and bittersweet, a reminder of the fleeting nature of our time together. As the sky began to lighten, a soft glow on the horizon signaling the approaching dawn, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet acceptance that while our path might be uncertain, it was worth every risk, every fear. In the following days, we fell into a rhythm, an unspoken agreement to live in the present, to cherish each moment without questioning the future. We spent our afternoons in the shed, working on projects and sharing stories, losing ourselves in the simplicity of our time together. It was as if we had created our own little world, a place where nothing else mattered, where we could be ourselves, free from the weight of expectations and anxieties. But even as we clung to this shared world, I could feel the edges fraying, the reality of our lives intruding, a reminder that this couldn't last forever. There were moments when I'd catch him looking at me, a hint of sadness in his eyes, as if he too felt the inevitable pull of the outside world, the forces that would eventually draw us apart. One afternoon, as we sat in the shed, the quiet ticking of the clock marking the passage of time, he turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if things were different?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, "but I try not to dwell on it. I'd rather focus on what we have here and now." He nodded, a small, wistful smile playing on his lips. "Me too," he replied, his gaze drifting towards the window as if searching for something just beyond reach. "But it's hard, isn't it? Knowing that no matter how much we want it, there are things we can't change." I reached out, placing my hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his pulse beneath my fingers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise, a silent acknowledgement that while our time together might be finite, it was real, and that was enough. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that while we couldn't control the future, we could choose how we spent the present. And in that moment, I knew I would always carry this time with me, a memory that would endure long after the days had faded, a reminder of a connection that transcended words, transcended time. The next morning, as we sat on the porch sipping coffee and watching the world awaken, I felt a sense of gratitude, a quiet joy in the simple moments we shared. It was a feeling I'd come to cherish, a reminder of the beauty in the everyday, the magic of being fully present with someone who understood me in ways I hadn't thought possible. But as the day progressed, I sensed a shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I looked at him, seeing the same realization reflected in his eyes, a silent understanding that our time together was drawing to a close. As the days slipped by, the distance between us grew, a quiet space neither of us dared to cross, a reminder that while our connection was genuine, it was constrained by the limits of time, a fleeting bond that would eventually fade. But even as we drifted apart, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that while our story might be ending, it would live on in my heart, a memory that would remain, a reminder of a love that was both beautiful and bittersweet. And as I watched him walk away, a part of me felt a sense of loss, a quiet ache that lingered in the empty space he left behind. But even as the pain settled over me, I felt a sense of gratitude, a quiet joy in the knowledge that I'd had the chance to experience something real, something that had touched my life in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. In the end, our story became a collection of moments, each one small but woven together into a memory that would forever reside in my heart. There was no need for grand gestures or explanations. The connection we shared was enough. As I looked out at the horizon, watching the colors fade into dusk, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that we had embraced something rare and real, even if only for a brief time. Though our paths had diverged, the warmth of that connection remained, a quiet presence that would always remind me of that summer.